Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AEye Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AEye Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AEye Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to AEye Scouted on Anfield Index Pro. I'm Dave Hendrick, joined once again by Mr. Karl Matchett. How are you, sir?
Exactly the same as I was 8 minutes ago.
That's good to know. That's good to know. In the time between when we last recorded 8 minutes ago and recording now, Watford have not only sacked a manager but appointed a new manager and potentially sacked him as well. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about groups G and H in this World Cup. We have done A and B, we've done C and D, we've done E and F. These are the last two, and let's jump straight in, Karl. With Group G, Brazil, Serbia, Switzerland and Cameroon. Brazil, one of the, I think, strong favourites for this competition. Obviously, 5-time winners. The World Cup is their thing. They haven't won it since 2002. That is seen as an outrage in Brazil. They won the South American round robin, finishing top, 6 points clear of Argentina, 14 wins and 3 draws in the group stage for the Brazilians. It is a strong squad, but it's not an all-time Brazil squad by any measure. Now, you do have a great goalkeeper in Alisson, a decent goalkeeper in Ederson, and you've got Weverton, the Palmeiras keeper, who's actually quite good, but is nothing more than third choice. My concern with them, Karl, is the defence, because Danillo's not very good. Thiago Silva's years past his best. Alex Telles is not very good. Bremer is good but unproven at international level. Roger Ibanez is good but unproven at international level. Eder Militao is good but not necessarily a starter unless he plays right back. Renan Lodi is a bit hit and miss, though very talented. Marquinhos is great, but he can't really hold it all together by himself. And of those not in the squad, Alexandro, Dani Alves, Guillermo Arana, Gabriel of Arsenal, Leo Ortiz, Felipe of Atletico Madrid, Emerson Royal, and Lucas Verismo. There's not really any of them that move the needle for me that gets me thinking, well, they have to be in the squad because they'll make a big difference. I think if Brazil fail at this World Cup, it will be this defence that cost them.
Yeah, probably so. I think they're another squad in here which I like because they've been quite well established as a group for quite a while. So they have a set way of playing. They know how they're going to construct moves. Their build-up is good. Too often I find, we've spoken about a few of them already, major nations going in, and they're seen as very, very good in terms of being a team who could potentially go the distance, but really they haven't got an identity of playing. They haven't really got a clue about the build-up, and they rely on either moments or set pieces or that sort of thing. I think Brazil know exactly how they're going to try and play. Whether they manage to play that way is obviously another thing, but I agree. I think the defence is definitely the weak part, and primarily the fullbacks, to be honest. I know you absolutely hate Thiago Silva with a loathing which rivals, most Middle-earth brethren and Sauron, but in general, we've spoken about Spain, for example, already, and how they have missed another defender who's quite like that in Sergio Ramos. I do wonder whether if Thiago Silva was not there, this Brazil side would fall apart completely, because he is the constant there in defence, and even if they have to allow for his deficiencies at this point and protect him to an extent and all the rest of it, if you take him out, somebody who does talk and does organise and does pull Danilo back when he sort of wanders over to the crowd to have a little chat instead of actually focusing on football for once, I dread to think what would happen to this defence, because I like Marquinhos, but he is not the talker, he's not the organiser, and the rest of them I could take or leave apart from Eder Militao. Bremer, I think, is a specialist in one particular role, which Brazil do not play. Renan Lodi, I don't think has really improved too much from when I saw him as like an 18, 19-year-old, to be honest. That's kind of why he's ended up at Nottingham Forest at the moment. I like a lot of the components of the squad overall, but the defence as a unit is a bit bad, to be blunt, and they need like the rest of the team to play well to protect the defence from having to do too many defensive things. They're not individually abysmal, but they're not like if you had a Champions League game and a Champions League attack and they went up against, let's say, Danilo and Alex Tejas and Roger Ibanez, I would favour the attack, to be perfectly honest. It would not be very much of a close decision either. I do hope that somebody like, even Guillermo Arana, I like it at the Olympics, which was not all that long ago. I really liked him. He was a decent outlet from fullback and he played pretty well overall. Just didn't happen for him at Sevilla whatsoever. I assume Alexandro will go if he's fit, so maybe he plays left back, and again that's like a known quantity at least. I would be inclined to, as you mentioned, play Eder Militao right back, because he's not going to play at centre back and he's wasted on the bench. Defensively, he's far, far better than Danilo is going to be. Danilo seems to be there now because he can play everywhere. Apparently by play everywhere, I mean not really play anywhere at all, but be put anywhere in the team, because that's what Juventus do.
Danilo and his versatility is like James Milner and his versatility. You can put him somewhere, he will stand in that position. It doesn't necessarily mean he can play there, but he'll go there. He'll happily go and stand in the position just to be on the pitch. I do agree with you in terms of, because the fullbacks are so bad, they need Thiago Silva as a voice. But as a pairing, I think Marquinhos and Militao would be a significantly better pairing. I do wonder if Militao right back, Bremer and Marquinhos, and allowing the left back to bomb forward while the others kind of shuffle into a three would work, but they haven't done that before, so they're not going to try it at this point. Midfield, it's a strong group. Casemiro, Lucas Paqueta, Fred, Everton Ribeiro, who stands out like a sore thumb, Fabinho, Bruno Guimaraes, others not in the group at the moment, Phil Coutinho, Artur, Danilo of Palmeiras, who's excellent, Gerson of Marseille, Ed Nielsen of Internacional, who I think is a good player and actually might be a better right back than the options they have, and Douglas Luiz. He does favour the Casemiro-Fred double pivot, which is one of the more baffling things that they do, but it works for them, so you can't really question it all that much. It's a strong, solid, reliable core of midfield players. Other than Paqueta and Guimaraes, if used correctly, there's no match winner there, but there's guys that will keep you in games and give you an element of control.
How did we get to the point where, with the exception of Everton Ribeiro, whose name obviously is in the Premier League, every midfielder plays in the Premier League? How did this happen? This did not used to be the case.
No, exactly. And, Coutinho obviously as well, Artur and Douglas Luiz. You've got Danilo has been in a squad, but he hasn't been capped. Gerson has 4 caps, and Ed Nielsen has 2 caps. And other than that, it is all Premier League midfielders, bar Everton Ribeiro, who, as you said, his name is in the Premier League. It's such a strange thing. It is such a strange thing. It's also not necessarily a good thing. No. Because they're all playing Premier League style football, and Brazil don't really play like a Premier League team, so they're having to alter how they play at their international level as well.
I've always really wanted them to have a go at a Fabinho Casemiro double pivot, because they always play a double pivot. There's no point in saying, I wish they play a 3 with Fabinho at the base. It just doesn't happen. They keep the double pivot, and they'll have either narrow sides and play sort of a 4-4-2, or they'll play an outright 4-2-3-1 or whatever, but it's a double pivot, and Fred is always there. But I wonder what the resistance is to playing Fabinho and Casemiro, because Casemiro at his best is not the defensive midfielder protecting the defence that the Champions League commentators will talk about. That's not who he is at all. But letting him off the leash a little bit with a more protective player alongside and behind him would be a really, really interesting thing to watch, I think. So I am a little bit curious as to why that hasn't happened, but I don't expect that we're going to see it now at the World Cup anyway.
No, I don't think so. But I do think it will be a pairing that would work very well, Casemiro and Fabinho. My assumption is that because Fred is a bit more mobile, that's kind of why he gets the call, because Casemiro isn't the most mobile player. Fabinho's not the most mobile player. I don't think it would be an issue if you just gave them half the pitch each to cover, middle of the park to touchline. But he seems to like Fred's energy. Not only is it weird that there are all of the Brazil midfielders in the Premier League, it's also just funny to look at a Brazil squad and see, a player from Nottingham Forest, a player from West Ham, and a player from Newcastle. And obviously not in the squad, 2 players from Aston Villa. Whether that says more about the strength of the Premier League or the weaknesses of the Brazil squad, I don't know. In attack, we've got Richarlison, more Premier League. We've got Neymar, we've got Anthony, Rafinha, Vinicius Jr., Matthias Cunha, Bobby Firmino, Pedro of Flamengo has 1 cap now, and Rodrigo, not in this current squad, Gabriel Jesus, Gabriel Martinelli, Gabriel Barbosa, and Arthur Cabral, who just lets the team down by not being called Gabriel. The question I have for you, Karl, is there were 4 Gabriels available for selection. Sorry, 5 Gabriels. Excuse me. Yes, 5 Gabriels available for selection, and all of them were left out. Gabriel Grando, Gabriel the centre-back, and the 3 attackers. What's the issue with the name Gabriel? Is it a cursed name in Brazil at the moment?
I assume that there is a next door neighbour of Chiche who has that name. Gabriel Barbosa, Melhorio Silva or something like that, and he has slighted him. Maybe didn't return his lawnmower when he said he was going to, or something like that. And Chiche, obviously being quite high profile, can't exact retribution in a public setting. Can't really react the way he'd like to, and gets caught on camera by his neighbour or something. So everybody else called Gabriel in Brazil, that's you in the mud.
There's been some suggestion that Edu might have called Tite and asked him to leave out the Arsenal boys. And if that is in any way true, that is a scandal, because it's giving Arsenal an unfair advantage. Maybe it's just that the Arsenal trio aren't nearly as good as people think, but my assumption is I don't think Gabigol will be in the squad. I don't think Martinelli will be in the squad. I'm almost certain Gabriel Jesus will make the World Cup squad. I think him, Richarlison, Neymar, Rafinha, and Vinicius Jr. are certainties. And then it probably comes down to one of Rodrigo, Bobby, Matthias Cunha, and Anthony to fill the other spot.
Yeah, there's possibly room for a couple of them, depending on who else they choose to leave out and everything, obviously, with the expanded squad. But I'd be surprised if Matthias Cunha goes, I'll be honest. I know they like him and they like to get him involved in that, but in a squad where you've not quite got as much freedom, let's say, to call up extra names, I'd be very, very surprised if he makes it, based on the fact that he's not exploded in the team and is not always in the Atletico team either. I think Gabi Jesus will go because of form. I think Anthony will go because he'll be probably quite hyped up and quite, playing very, very well at that time, possibly. I don't actually know. I'm not sure I've ever seen Pedro, the Flamengo forward, at all, to be perfectly honest. So I'm not going to say whether he'll go or not at all. But I think then you're looking at one out of the second forwards, like Firmino, Cunha, maybe Martinelli. I think probably Martinelli's for the next cycle, to be honest. But even then, because of where Martinelli plays, obviously, and his best being from the left, you're looking at him going up against Neymar, who does play there if he's not playing through the middle, Richarlison, who has sort of forced his way into being a starter quite frequently for them, and Vinicius Jr., who might be the most in-form forward or wide forward in Europe at the moment. So I don't really see the need to take him, if anything.
No, I agree. What are you expecting as a front four? I mean, there's been some suggestion that Richarlison might be the 9 with Neymar as the 10, Vinicius and Rafinha as the wingers. If that is the front four, that could be absolutely electric.
Yeah, I mean, they do tend to rotate it quite a lot. And so even like if you start with a 10 or one just off the forward line, you'll still see them with 2 up front quite a lot. The wide players will be really, really narrow. I think Vinny and Neymar are the 2 absolute certainties to start. So if you say Vinny is the left notionally one and Neymar is effectively the 10, it does leave them quite a lot of flexibility, to be fair. I think if they think that they're going to be in the penalty area all the time, you probably would start Richarlison or Gabriel Jesus or Firmino, depending on who goes and who's in good form heading in. I would be inclined to start Rafinha because you get the additional work rate and balance in a 4-4-2 off the ball. But Lucas Paqueta has been really heavily involved for them over the last 6 months or so, something like that. So could easily see it being Neymar with Lucas Paqueta off him, at least in the more evenly matched games where they might want a bit more build-up play, that sort of thing. So I think there's 2 definites and then 2 which could be just rotated game to game anyway.
Yeah, I think Rafinha could be important because of his ability to track back. Because Vinicius doesn't really bother himself with tracking back a lot of the time. I think you want one of your wingers to at least help out a fullback, and these fullbacks will need help. They're for me, they're definitely among the favourites to win the tournament, even though it is far from a vintage Brazil. Moving on then to Serbia, they won Group A of the UEFA qualifying phase ahead of Portugal, my dearly beloved Ireland, Luxembourg and Azerbaijan. I don't really know what to make of this Serbia squad because there's some good players and then some I'm just really not sure of. Not overly certain on any of the goalkeepers. Dimitrovic isn't bad. Vanja Milinkovic-Savic is okay, but he's only got the 5 caps. The defence, Nikola Milinkovic is very good. Matija Nastasic never quite developed. He had a couple of injuries, including a bad Achilles one. Stefan Mitrovic of Getafe is not someone I've seen huge amounts of. It's not an outstanding group of defenders. They do have talent in midfield. Dusan Tadic, Filip Kostic, Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, Nemanja Maksimovic, who's one that's had a weird career in terms of where he's played. Nemanja Radinic is a good player. But again, I don't see a lot of standout players here. It is very much that the collective is their strength. But the player they will rely on heavily is Aleksandar Mitrovic. Now, they have 3 good strikers. Mitrovic, Dusan Vlahovic, who's going to be a problem for everybody in the next couple of years, and Luka Jovic, who obviously had a disastrous time at Real Madrid. He's gone to Fiorentina, and it's taking him a bit of time to find anything resembling form, but we know he is a good player. We saw it at Eintracht, although it could be made, a case could be made that maybe that was just a fluke season. But in Mitrovic and Vlahovic, I mean, that's a lot of beef up front.
Yes, to put it brutally.
You put Sergey into that group as well, and if they're a front 3, one behind 2, all you want to do is launch long balls and big high balls, and you're going to cause teams problems.
I mean, look, the really good thing is that they're actually set up perfectly to play this way as well, because they play 3 wing backs and an arrangement, and that arrangement obviously depends on whether they start with 2 up front or 1 just off 1 or whoever it is, because they've rotated that attack and set up a lot, but it's always 3 with wing backs. And then your wing backs, you're basically looking at Filip Kostic on the left hand side, whose job in the world of football is pick up the ball, run some distance and ping over one of the best balls you've seen across from wide areas in many a year. That's what he does. That's what he does for club. That's what he does for country as well. And on the other side, it's probably Zivkovic, I guess. Again, it's sort of one of the roles which maybe is a little bit up for grabs, but I think Zivkovic is probably the first choice if available and playing and everything. So both of them are just get the ball, run, cross, and quite hard working as well. Not defensively outrageously good, because they're more wingers than fullbacks, but they work hard and they function quite well and they keep the width and everything. So they do have an out ball. They're not like a back five, which gets stuck in a five and can't find their way out because they always have that out ball to a big forward at the very least. The wing backs always try to get forward because they're wingers. So it's really nicely set up to make the most of beef in attack, to use your word. If they played Mitrovic and Vlahovic up front as a two, I honestly think that in this group, at the very least, there's not really too many teams who are going to stop them defensively. If it's just continuous all game long, every time they get the opportunity to build up, it's either played wide and slung in from deep, or they play through the middle and play off the second balls. There's not too many people who can cope with that kind of aggression, that kind of power, the hold-up play that Vlahovic is like so good at and working in the channels. And we've seen Mitrovic this year give all sorts of centre-backs a real run with his hold-up play and his link play and everything like that. And it's not just even Milinkovic-Savic coming from deep, but Dusan Tadic as well. They'll probably play both off them. So whether it's a 3-4-3 or a 3-5-1-1, and it's like just Tadic off one of the strikers, it's pretty good, to be honest. They have like a lot of second ball, really good touch, quite good at opening up defences, decent movement between the lines. It's not, like you say, an elite 11s, but they have enough good players to make the structure that they have work really, really well for them.
And you hit the key point. They know what they want to do, and they don't try to do anything else. Like, they don't try and play pretty patterns. They just know what they want to do. And I mean, we see Trent on a weekly basis, and you know, you'd look at him and you'd look at Kevin De Bruyne, and one of them is the best right-footed crosser in the world. But there's absolutely no doubt that the best left-footed crosser in the world is Filip Kostic, who might just be the best crosser of a ball anywhere in the world. He is absolutely ridiculous with his delivery, and I don't know how it's taken this long for a big club to take a chance on him.
Do you know who he reminded me of before he's gone to Juventus, and probably even before last year, but who he reminds me of from English football back in the day? And it's a terrible, terrible name to throw out because Kostic has now become like quite a big reputation. And not a million miles away, to be honest. Steve Guppy.
Oh, that's a shout.
He used to just get the ball,
Steve Guppy at Leicester as a wing-back,
and deliver it absolutely beautifully. He was not like really rapid, he was not like ridiculously skillful, but he played like left back, left wing back. He played wherever you needed him to, and he could just get the ball, move it a little bit and cross, and he was so good at it. And I think Kostic is like a lot like that.
That's a really good shout. That's a really, really good shout. And a shout out here to that Leicester team from back in the day where Steve Guppy was outstanding. He obviously went on to... I think he was good for Celtic before he got injured. But just an absolute wand of a left foot. His ability to put the ball wherever he wanted was just incredible. Now, the rest of his game let him down. But you know, the guy had a long career. He played nearly 20 years, got one England cap. But he could properly cross the ball. And Kostic is the same. I was really hoping West Ham would get him when they went for him in the summer, because I just really wanted to see him play in the Premier League. But obviously you're not going to turn down Juventus to go to West Ham. And I'd imagine having Vlahovic there was a factor in that as well. But yeah, I mean, if they can routinely get the ball wide to Kostic with and all he needs is a little bit of space, he will put the ball in for Mitrovic and Vlahovic. And God bless any centre-back who has to go up against that. Like, if Thiago Silva looked old before today, he will look real old trying to defend against those two. Because they'll just hurl themselves into him.
Yeah, and that's the first game. So it's, another one that I was going to say is very dependent on, like Serbia, if you're going to pick out a flaw with them, it's that as a group they have underachieved at times. Like when it comes to teams where you really want them to be quite good and quite effective they've been below par, and sometimes if they get a bad result it can spark a series of bad results, and they can't really afford that to happen, Brazil being the first group stage game. I actually think they can beat Brazil. I think their game and the way that they set up is good enough to give Brazil a horrible, horrible game and maybe beat them as a result of maybe just power and just sort of just bullying them basically when they get into attack. I'd expect Brazil to have more of the ball and more open play chances and all the rest of it, but I could see a scenario where Serbia actually get a result against Brazil and beat them. But you can also see Brazil turning up and their best players are unbelievably good. Like if Neymar turns up and is sensational and Casemiro has one of his all-time games, there's not much you can do to stop that kind of thing, and you have to accept that.
No.
But what Serbia have to do is accept that and regroup and go again for the last two group games, because they have a massive, massive chance to get through this group. But if they lose a couple of goals to Brazil or something like that and fall apart as a unit, as a group, as a bunch of individuals who think they should be doing better and start falling out with each other as they have done previously, they could lose all three.
Yeah, that is the risk with them. They're just the one team that you could see doing either topping the group or finishing bottom, because it just they're a fiery group of boys, and God, it would be fun to see them just go out and absolutely dominate Brazil. It really would, because it could also be the best thing that happens to Brazil, where Brazil sort of not go into panic mode, but get really, really motivated for the last two games, go and smash Switzerland and Cameroon, and then go into the knockout phases and have a more difficult run as the second place team, and have to kind of peak over and over and over again. And maybe we do see a great Brazil team. Let's move on then to Switzerland.
Worth noting, the head coach, Dragan Stojkovic, as well, has had his moments as like an unbelievably world-class player in his days, and also an absolute head case. So,
absolutely.
We'll see how that goes.
One of the great players from the late 80s and early 90s with Red Star and with Marseille, one of the stars of the 1990 World Cup with that incredibly talented Yugoslavia team. I mean, when that Red Star Belgrade team came together in the late 80s, before they went on to win the European Cup, they were just terrifying, and he was the star name in that group. Obviously, he won a European Cup with Marseille, didn't he? Which was then taken away, but just a great, great player. So Switzerland, they topped Group C, somewhat surprisingly, ahead of Italy, Northern Ireland, Bulgaria, who are god-awful, and Lithuania. The Swiss have some talent and then some issues. Now, Jan Sommer's obviously a good goalkeeper. We've both admired him for quite a while. They've also got Gregor Kobal of Borussia Dortmund, who's injured at the minute, but he's very, very good. In defence, some players that have been around a while. Ricardo Rodriguez, Fabian Schär, new Manchester City centre-back Manuel Akanji, Nico Elvedi, who has been at Mönchengladbach for a long time. Actually, he broke through there when Andreas Christensen was there on loan, and together they were a really good pairing. Sylvain Vidmar has been around a long time. Kevin Mbappé of Fulham, solid player. Eric Comort of Valencia, another player I'm hugely familiar with. That is most likely to be the defensive group for this World Cup. Midfield, you've got Shaqiri, you've got Xhaka, they're the captain and vice-captain. Remo Freuler, now of West Ham, or not of West Ham, of Nottingham Forest. Dennis Zakaria, Gibril Sau, talented player from Eintracht Frankfurt. Renato Stefan, Fabian Frey, Mikel Abisher, not massively keen on him, to be honest. Arden Jashiri hasn't been capped yet. And again, that's probably going, unless Steven Zuber gets himself back in, that's probably going to be the midfield group. Up front, Haris Seferovic, Breel Mbolo, inconsistency defined. Ruben Vargas, inconsistency. Cedric Itan, decent player. Dan Adoy, Zeki Amundi. Noah Okafor I do like, of Red Bull Salzburg. I think he's one with a bright future. Andy Zakiri of Basel, he's owned by Brighton. He's talented. Christian Fasnacht, fairly run-of-the-mill. Alba Najeti came to England, to West Ham, did nothing, went to Celtic, did little. Now back playing in Austria, where he'd been before, with Sturm Graz, I think.
Yeah, he's at Sturm now.
It's not a massively inspiring squad, Karl, but what we know about this team is they work immensely hard together. They know their roles. They're really well drilled, really well organised. They love nothing more than to spring an upset. They're fairly well managed by Murat Yakin, who himself is a legendary Swiss player. Was part of a great Grasshopper Zurich team back in the early to mid 90s, and then went on sort of a bit of a journeyman career. His brother Hakan Yakin, probably a bit more well known. They're going to be a hard team to beat, and in Shaqiri and Seferovic, when those two are on form, they are match winners.
I'm not having that. Haris Seferovic, a match winner, about once every 25 games. Useless lump.
About once every 15 games, he decides that it's time. You remember, you spoke badly of him,
and he had his 1 in 20,
and he had his one good game
straight after. Couldn't have timed it better. I assume it's like contractually written into Switzerland's appearances at major tournaments that they reach the round of 16 and no further and no less, and that's kind of what they do nearly every single time. I think like 3 of the last 5 at the World Cup, or 4 of the last 5 or something like that have been round of 16, and mostly it's like the Euros as well now. They got to the quarters last year as well, so that was like really good for them to get that far. They have a squad which I think is capable of going through to the round of 16, but I don't think that they will. I think the only reason I think that they won't is because I think, like we've just spoken about, I think Serbia's team is better set up and is better capable of scoring goals than this one is. Switzerland are very, very reliant on either Shaqiri being international Shaqiri or set pieces or something going quite right for them, during the game, which is outside of, let's say, great build-up, because they're not a team which are going to be massively reliant on incredibly flowing moves and all the rest of it. Their build-up, their ball progression is actually pretty good, like through to the final third. But it's once they get there, they lack a bit of quality. That's all it is, really. I assume that Noah Okafor will go as long as he's fit, because he is now what, let's say, Briel Mbolo was 5 years ago. He's like the new hope who's going to come through and is actually going to be that missing piece in the final third. He's going to be the number 9 who is going to be a reliable source of goals and all that kind of thing. They've had a few of these along the last probably 15 years, to be fair, and none of them actually quite go on and take that next step. So Okafor, I assume, will go, and they will try to see if he can be one of those. He's obviously not a 9, but someone who can move from a bit deeper and try and get into that final third and make things happen for them. But otherwise, other than the defence, which I really, really like the structure of and the combinations that they have, this is a bit uninspiring.
It is. It is a bit uninspiring. I mean, when you look at that squad, and you look at the two, I suppose, I don't know if the two biggest names is the right way of saying it, but you look at Xhaka and Shaqiri. I mean, the only reason they actually have them is because of a war. Both of them would have played elsewhere otherwise, but their parents were obviously forced to move to Switzerland, and they just don't produce enough players. Karl, is the simple fact of it. They don't produce enough good players on a regular basis. It is a bit uninspiring. You're right. Normally, they find a way to grind their way through a group and get themselves out the far side. I just don't see them getting out of this group. And to be frank, it wouldn't surprise me if they finish bottom. It really wouldn't. I think the first game against Cameroon is massive for them. Because I don't see them beating Brazil. And I think Serbia will absolutely mash them, just from a physicality point of view. Like, Xhaka and Shaqiri play well when the game is really slow. I just think Serbia will have too much for them from a physicality point of view.
As long as Serbia, like I say, haven't imploded at that point when they meet,
Yeah.
I think it's I could maybe see Switzerland going toe-to-toe as a defensive unit and getting a point if that's all they needed to go through, but they have to put themselves in a position where that's enough, and that's what makes that first game, like you say, all important. They have to win that game.
They do. Right, on to our friends in Cameroon. They topped their mini group, Group D, in the second round of the African qualifier. A bit of a surprise, finished ahead of Ivory Coast, and then knocked out Algeria on away goals in the third round, which again I think was a bit of a surprise. Andre Onana, the goalkeeper, is very, very good now at Inter Milan, but not yet first choice there.
Not doing well there.
No, not doing particularly well. The defence screams, please come out of retirement, Joel Matip. It doesn't really inspire a whole lot of confidence. But I do like a couple of the midfielders. I like Olivier Ntcham. I think he's a solid enough player. I really like Jean Onana. I think he's really, really good. And obviously Lens have signed him from Bordeaux to replace Doucouré, who went to Crystal Palace. Palace actually looked at Onana as well, and I think originally were hoping to sign both. They do have Zambo, who's really good and will likely be one of the midfielders. I think him and Onana could be a strong midfield together. That's Vincent Aboubakar is a problem. He's physical, he's hard-working. Karl Toko Ekambi is physical, he's hard-working. Brian Mbomo of Brentford is a good player, for sure. Kevin Georges and Kudu came to Spurs for a while, didn't really work out for him. They do still have Choupo-Moting knocking about that they can call up. Clinton NG, I think he's another one of those failed. Isn't he another one of those failed Spurs wingers? Was he at Spurs? I think he was at Spurs.
Yeah.
He was indeed. And Paul George's Entep is one of them who, for a time, looked like he was going to develop into a real player, and he flatlined and never became much of anything. Did get a couple of caps for France back in 2015 when he was at Rennes, but just never kicked on from there. I don't see them going through. I think it would take everything going right for them to go through, but I could see them beating Switzerland. I don't know why. I just could see them beating Switzerland. Cameroon will always have a place in my heart because the 1990 World Cup, when they went on the pitch and just kicked Argentina all the way back to Buenos Aires, remains one of the most magnificent things that's ever happened in world football. They were absolute lunatics. And obviously you had Roger Milla, who I'm surprised is still not in the squad. He's probably 70 by now. But they were just so much fun. And it was the first real African nation to make a proper big impact at a World Cup. First game, they beat the holders with Maradona. And they started the rise of African football as we saw through the 90s, the noughties, and the 10s. And I'll just always have a soft spot for Cameroon. But by Jesus, could they do with Joel Matip in that defence?
Yeah, I think, as an ignorant outsider as I am and not following African football all the time, every time the World Cup rolls around, if Cameroon aren't in, I'm always surprised. And there's no reason for me to be because I'm not following it, but it is because of exactly what you've just said. They were the first ones, and so you kind of assume that they're always going to be there. Therefore, they were World Cup 90 was like my first one as well. It was something that was like massive for me, and this guy just doing this mad celebration by the corner flag, I'd never seen anything like that, and so Cameroon just became this thing in my mind, and they always had to be there. I'm glad that they're there. I enjoy it when they're there. I have quite a few memories of Cameroon actually now thinking about it, including obviously England at the World Cup as well, so it's an intriguing thing to see them back. But what I do think about this squad, the current squad, is that in midfield, it's again the same as it has been a lot of times. You've got quite a few ball carriers, quite a few players who can break up play, which could be really, really good for them against sides who are either not particularly well organised or who have obvious spaces through central areas in their team. But there's nobody there who I think is going to be absolutely rock solid defensively themselves. Like ball winning and doing the Rodri role, let's say, are two really different things. And I don't see in a side that tends to be playing, it seems 4-4-2. Just had a quick look back at 3 or 4 of their most recent games, or most recent notable games, I should say. It's 4-4-2 or variations thereof. And a double pivot of ball winners is okay, but as we can see by watching Everton through most of the last 6 months and probably the next 6 months as well, it doesn't always protect you against teams who are very, very good in the build-up. In attack, I think they might actually be all right. I think if they play like just one of the brutes, like Vincent Abubakar you mentioned, is like he's got a bit of movement about him, but mostly it's about his hold-up play, his channel running, that kind of thing. But then also another one coming in from the sides like Karl Kambi is a pretty decent goal scorer. Brian Mbeumo, we know, is a decent creator as well on the ball. So they might be all right from that regard in terms of creating their own chances. But see them getting exposed quite a bit at the back as well. And Andre Onana, as much as he was a very, very good goalkeeper, when he went back in for Ajax, was obviously nowhere near the top of his game after quite a long time on the sidelines after his drugs ban. And in pre-season at Inter Milan was not good, let's say.
No, he was not. That drugs ban was just such a shame because he was in really good form and it just completely scuppered things. They will need him to be at his best. I think he might be a busy boy at this tournament. Right. Brazil first, Serbia second, Switzerland third, Cameroon fourth. The bottom two I could switch. The top two I could switch as well, but I do think unless Serbia properly implode here, I think Serbia should come through with Brazil. And as we've said, there is a world in which they beat Brazil and top this group.
I could also see them beating Brazil and not topping the group because that's just what they are.
That's a fair point. They could beat Brazil and not go through. It's just mental. Yeah. But they were really consistently good through the qualifiers. They were that one team that just looked a real threat through the qualifiers.
I do think they're really well set up. I can see them definitely causing an upset, let's say, in one of the knockout games, as long as they get there.
Yeah, agreed. They're going to be a pain in the arse. No one wants to play against Mitrovic right now. No one. And no one wants to play, absolutely nobody ever wants to play against Mitrovic and Vlahovic. And if you have the creativity of Tadic, you get the brilliance of Sergej, the crossing of Kostic, if they can get all of that on the pitch together, that is going to be problematic for basically everybody. And they're strong defensively. The individuals aren't great, but the collective is good. So, yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be quite good. Let's move on then to our last group. This is Group H: Portugal, Ghana, Uruguay, South Korea. Karl, I think this is probably the most balanced group in terms of, I think any two could come through out of this group. So let's start with Portugal. They finished second to Serbia in the qualifying group and then got a little bit fortunate in their backdoor path. They beat Turkey and then they beat North Macedonia because Italy had shit the bed in their game against North Macedonia. Bruno Fernandes, the kind of the starring role in that final, or the final playoff game. This Portuguese team is full of talent. But I have a serious concern about the goalkeeper because I don't think Rui Patricio is any good. I think they've got good fullbacks, João Cancelo. Diogo Dalot's not great, but he's in good form. Nuno Mendes is tremendous. I'm not a big fan of Mario Rui, as you know. Ruben Diaz is very good. Thiago Jallo, I really like. I'm not a big fan of Danilo Pereira, and I'm hopeful that David Carmo can work his way into this squad in the next little while. And Goncalo Inacio of Sporting is another one to keep an eye on. Him and Carmo are going to be the future of this national team, either as a 2 or either side of Diaz and a 3. It has to happen. Rafael Guerrero is another one that'll probably be in the squad. Pepe might be in the squad. Probably will be in the squad, I think it's fair to say. So, it's a strong group of defenders with one or two little liabilities. Midfield, João Palhinha is very, very good. Bruno's great. Bernardo's incredible. Matheus Nunes is fantastic. William Carvalho's an old, experienced head. He's fallen off a bit, but he's still decent. Vitinha is very, very talented. João Mario is a grafter who always puts in his best work for the national team. Ruben Neves, we know, has been one of the best midfielders in the Premier League for a while. João Moutinho, probably in the squad as, one of the leaders. Renato Sanchez, if he gets a bit of form, might work his way in. And Otavio is an option. There's not going to be many teams that can match what they offer in midfield.
Definitely not. This is another one similar to a few we've spoken about of the big nations where the midfield is where they will win and lose, or where they will progress or won't, or go home early. Because in attack, we know that there's some unbelievable individuals, and we'll discuss maybe one or two of them. But in the midfield is where everything is arranged so that attack can work as it needs to, and the defence can be protected as it needs to. Because I'm with you. I mean, again, there's like a triangle there, which I'm not hugely keen on. It's, I think, built to be a little bit more restrained and functional than you might think. If you got like João Cancelo at fullback, you might think, well, we'll make the best use of him going forward. But I think in this case, it's probably best for them that they don't necessarily ask him to do all the attacking stuff and actually be part of a unit which is a little bit more cohesive and a little bit more restrained sort of thing, because that is where their weak spots are, really. And they are a side which can beat quite good teams, but have also shown themselves to be beaten by teams who they should at least match, and then you sort of look at them spanking Switzerland in the Nations League, and then they go and lose to them as well. And that's a little bit where they are. If the forward players don't really show or be in really good form, they do have the capacity to suffer quite bad defeats, because defence isn't actually that good and is not necessarily capable of keeping clean sheet after clean sheet after clean sheet. So it's quite important for them in any given game against a reasonable opponent that midfield that they have is perfectly put in place. And I'm a little bit hesitant to say that they have it spot on at the minute, because I think that they turn to the same faces a bit too often when they might be better off slightly altering how they build up play through the middle. I don't think that people like Vitinha, for example, or even João Moutinho, to be perfectly honest, are good enough to be in this Portugal side what they need the midfield to do at the moment.
I agree. I also think there's another issue, which is that the Bruno Fernandes that we see, when he was at Sporting, when he first went to United, and in recent weeks, and the Bernardo Silva that we see at Monaco and at Man City, they're not the same players for Portugal. Now, there's two reasons for that. One is there's a lot more restriction put on them, because the midfield, like you said, is to support both ends rather than be given the freedom to be the match winners they could be. And I do think, with Bernardo and Bruno in particular, they're hamstrung a little bit in this team. Now, if we look at the attack, you've got João Felix, who's a magnificently talented player, Pedro Neto, who I think we both very much like, Diogo Jota, Ricardo Horta, who's just so much fun for Braga, Rafael Leao, who's an absolute star about to explode, Goncalo Ramos of Benfica, I do like, Andre Silva of Leipzig, I like, but he has been fairly poor for Leipzig, Guedes, a favourite of yours, Trincao, Rafa Silva has unfortunately retired. And then there's Cristiano. And here's my hot take, Karl. They'd be better without him.
I think that's known by now.
He is holding this team back in the same way he holds back his club teams. He did it at United and he did it at Juve. I think they would be better without him. I think they'd be better with Ramos or Jota as the 9, Leao off one wing, and say Bernardo off the other, with Bruno as a 10, a double pivot in midfield, Cancelo and Nuno Mendes given license to get forward, and then say Ruben Diaz and maybe David Carmo as the centre-back pairing. The whole team functions to allow Cristiano to score his goals, but he's not going to score enough goals to win them the World Cup. He's not going to be good enough to win them the World Cup. He wasn't great at the Euros. He wasn't great at the last World Cup. I don't care about golden boots. I really don't care about golden boots. Tap-ins and penalties don't impress me. I know they won the Euros in 2016, but he was fairly poor for a lot of that tournament, and he was off the pitch when they won the final. I think he holds them back. I think his selfishness, his me attitude holds them back, and I think a lot of the players pander to that. We've seen Bruno Fernandes, the drop-off in form he suffered when Cristiano arrived at United is the same drop-off in form that we've seen over and over again with players that play with him. We saw it with Sancho last year as well, and with Rashford. They both had career worst seasons. But him out of the team now, and all of them are flourishing, was the same thing at Juve. Multiple players, Dybala being the key example, was probably the best player in Serie A. He arrived, Dybala fell off, and didn't even get a new contract from Juve. I just don't think I think a stronger manager just says to him, it's over. It's done. But he's so egotistical and so determined to get to 200 caps and, obliterate all scoring records that I think he's putting himself before the team, and it's hurting the team.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fairly well accepted by now, to be honest. And the silly thing about it is that he could probably be as effective in terms of goals to games if they used him in the last 25 minutes of matches, and they would probably have a better platform for the game by that point if they had a much more mobile, much more aggressive attack. I mean, you mentioned Jota through the middle. Yes, João Felix as a 9 as well, with Fernandes a much higher 10 would work really well as well, because of how much he loves to get behind the forward. So I think either of those with Leao on one side, and we could go over and over this team, yes, it would work better. But in the absence of that, because he is going to start, I think that someone like João Palhinha would be almost a must start for me in centre midfield for them, just because of how aggressive he is, how much of a ball winner he is. If you have him and Ruben Neves as your 2, I think that gives you enough of a balance of mobility, aggression, physicality, but also technical ability. So, yeah, it shouldn't be that much of a difficult switch, to be honest, because Carvalho and Neves are still 2 of the most regularly starting players if they play the double pivot. If it's a 3, then maybe it's a little bit different because they put Silva as one of the 8s, for example. But if you just want to be functional, just want to give a supply line, I think just Palhinha. It probably solves quite a few of their issues, to be honest. He's not the most outrageously talented, but he would work a bit better in the team, I think.
Yeah, he's very good at what he does, and that's kind of what they need, is just someone that does their job really well and gives them that defensive solidity. And he's, like you said, he's got good aggression as well. The best thing that could probably happen to them is Cristiano, breaks his foot or something in the first game, and they're just able to play their best 11. Because in that case, the defence probably, and in particular the central defence, probably stops them from being good enough to win the World Cup. But, I mean, most teams have at least one hole. That would be theirs. I mean, Rui Patricia's not great, but, he might just catch a bit of form for a couple of games. But everything else is there. Like, that is as strong a midfield group as anyone has. The fullbacks are good. The attackers are outstanding. And I agree with you. Like, if he would just accept coming on with 15, 20, 25 to go, I think I would make them one of my favourites to win it all. But he's going to start, and he's going to hurt this team. And it's going to cost them, I think. And unfortunately, Fernando Santos is a good manager and has obviously done a great job with Portugal in that he won the Euros. And that can never, ever be taken away from him, is that he won the Euros. But he has pandered far too much. And by all accounts, he is gone after this tournament. So maybe the next manager will come in and show a bit more strength towards Cristiano. But then public opinion is still children on Twitter that he's still the best player in the world. Anyway, let's move on. It's just a shame because this is probably the last. This is the last World Cup in their prime for Bruno and for Silva, which, it should be a time for them to go and really, really show what they can be. let's move on then to Ghana. So Ghana came through out of Group G of Stage 2 of the African qualifiers ahead of South Africa, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe. They would then go on and defeat Nigeria on away goals. A little bit fortunate in how that happened, because they were substantially outplayed, I thought, across the second game in particular. Lots and lots and lots of young talent available to Ghana, and they've done a really good job at securing some new talent. So Tariq Lamptey has made the change to Ghana, made his international debut. Mohamed Salisu, who obviously is Ghanaian by birth, but had been holding off playing at international level, he is now committed to the group. You obviously got Thomas Partey in midfield, who's kind of the biggest name there, but Mohamed Kudus is in tremendous form for Ajax at the moment. You've got Kamaldeen Suleimana, who's immensely gifted. You've got Abdul Fatoué Ishahaku of Sporting, another very, very gifted player. You've got the AEye brothers still knocking around. Inaki Williams, long time linked with Liverpool. He's made the switch and made his debut recently. Antoine Semenyo of Bristol City, talented player. He's just made his debut as well. There's talent in this squad, Karl. There really is. There's a team forming from this group.
Yeah, there is basically half a team of exceptional players here now, and obviously the very, very difficult thing they'll face in terms of this World Cup is integrating them into a team in a shape which works cohesively without annoying all the players who have been quite established and got them to the World Cup in the first place, because you still need the rest of that team and that squad obviously to be fully on board. So I think it would be pretty harsh and hard to do to just start the World Cup with Lamptey, Salisu, probably Owusu, Iñaki Williams, and they're all into the team straight away, and that's like their second cap or third cap. That's a pretty harsh thing to do to the people who have got you there. But on the other hand, it could actually make them individually good enough to win a match here. I think it's a very, very tough group for Ghana, to be honest. I don't expect them to go through at all, but I think that these players that they brought in at least gives them a platform to have a chance, even if it is calling on maybe two or three of them off the bench. I think it's really important that they establish a centre-back partnership as quickly as possible, whether that's Marty and Salisu or maybe Diku and Salisu. Whichever one it is basically going to have to work near seamlessly in tandem with each other. And like I say, there's limited, obviously, time to get that to work. I think they've got 2 friendlies and then obviously straight into the group stage. So it's possible that they can cause a bit of an upset because they have some unbelievably gifted individuals. I'm really keen to see how Iñaki does. I presume he's going to go, obviously, to the World Cup now. But you mentioned him, Kudus. He's the one. He's the one who could be the difference between them staying in the game, because he sort of fashions a chance for them to score a goal, and actually taking a surprise win off somebody or anything at all. He is such a class player. I just love watching him. He tends to play a bit deeper for Ghana so far than he does for Ajax at the minute, but wherever they put him on the pitch, he's probably going to be at the centre of all their build-up play anyway.
Yeah, he's an impact player no matter where you use him. Whether you use him in midfield, you use him wide, you use him as a 10, or you play him up front. He will find ways to impact games, and his talent is outrageous. Him and Suleimana are just they're 2 players to keep very close eyes on. They're 2 players I would imagine Liverpool have scouted extensively because they fit the profile of what we look for. Looking forward to seeing how Ghana do have question marks over the goalkeepers, largely because I'm ignorant to the goalkeepers. Don't know much about Ofori, Nuruddin or Wallacott, who plays for Charlton. None of them hugely experienced. 37 caps between the 3, no more than 24. But it'll be interesting. I'm also interested to see how Gideon Mensah does, because if you remember a few years ago, he was very highly regarded and he never quite kicked on and got himself to the next level. But he's a solid enough player, and he is talented, and he's still only 23, 24. On then to Uruguay. one of my sneaky dark horses, not to win it, but to just have a decent run, because it is the last hurrah for the old generation. So Muslera will likely retire after this World Cup, certainly from international football. Suarez, I think this is his last go. I'd imagine Cavani, it will be his last go. Christian Stuani, Diego Godin, possibly Seb Coates as well, though he's a little bit younger, and Martin Caceres, almost certainly done after this. But there's a lot of good younger players in this squad, Karl. Ronald Araujo has been outstanding for Barcelona since he was given a chance. Oliveira and Viña, the two left-backs, are both really good. I really like Bentancur. I like Lucas Torreira. I love Fede Valverde. I love Manuel Ugarte. The Diaz, I'm not even going to pronounce it, Georgian, the fellow who plays for Flamengo, he's really, really good. Amazed me that he hasn't come to Europe. He's really, really good. And then up front, you've got Facundo Pellistri, who's really gifted, and I don't know why United won't give him any kind of opportunities. Obviously, Darwin. Martin Satriano's another very talented one. Diego Rossi's very talented, but a little bit infuriating. It's just it's a well-balanced team, and they sort of have meshed the older players with the younger players quite well. Like I said, I don't think they can win it, but I could see them getting out of the group and being an absolute nightmare in the knockout phases.
I think if you get them in a knockout game, yeah, they'd be a horrible pain in the ass to play against. It would be everything that you expect playing against Uruguay, basically. They will make it any kind of war that they need to. They are still super aggressive, even though there's been a big turnover, especially in that midfield department. You think of all the ones that they seem to have for about 8 World Cups in a row there, which have all been turned over now. And even a few of the players who are still involved. And not just me like Suarez, but you mentioned like Stuani. He was never even good enough to start back in the day. So how he's still involved, I don't know. It's because he's still part of that ridiculous group who will just fight and work for everything, and everything was just going to be gone through an absolute scrap to get there. I think even like Pereira and all the other ones who they had were exactly the same. They weren't all necessarily the best players and wouldn't even start, but as soon as they came on, they would be like backing up everybody else all the time. And this current group is still pretty much the same, to be honest. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit more speed and technique. I'd say probably replaced a few of the people like Ladero and all those kinds of ones who were like almost really good, but not quite in the end. And I think it's still a little bit unpredictable how they'll line up. I assume they're going to go with the back four, but they have played a 3 quite a few times as well. If like Jimenez has still been in the squad, that kind of thing. So there's a few question marks defensively over who will be fit and available, obviously, to play. Araujo can play as a third centre-back or right back for them as well. So I would put him at centre-back now and just leave him there because that's where he needs to be and is probably the best one that they've got now. But they also maybe have 1 or 2 gaps in the team, let's say, at right back. So maybe he has to fill that out of necessity. But overall, I think if they are asked to defend quite a lot, they'll struggle. I think if they come up against teams who are quite dominant and who pin them back and they'll make it a fight and they'll make it aggressive, but I think that they will struggle to get upfield enough. I don't see that there's enough speed through the midfield and final third phases. It's still quite reliant on aggression and like 2 or 3 people being really good at ball carrying. Obviously, people like Bentancur and Valverde, they're like Champions League level quality players. There's no question about them. And Valverde this season is maybe one of the top 5-6 midfielders in general in Europe at the moment. He's been sensational.
Yeah.
So get a couple of people like that on the ball as often as possible. Yeah, you got a chance. But I do worry a little bit about the lack of transitional play and ability to withstand sustained attacks, let's say.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if Araujo's right back, you're probably looking at Jose Jimenez and Godin at centre back. Godin is, or Coates as well. Yeah, I mean Godin is 36. Coates is 31, and he is slow. Like he was slow when he was 21. He is painfully slow now. And Jimenez his career has been blighted by injuries. He's still somehow managed almost 80 caps despite the fact that he plays about 15 games a season at club level. But the one thing you can never doubt with this group is their commitment. I mean, they will absolutely go to war for that shirt. And whatever they're asked to do, they will do. And they will do it until they can't run anymore. Now, obviously, Diego Alonso's not the manager they had for many, many years, but he has kept that spirit, kept that mentality and mindset while bringing along some of these younger players. And I just want them to do well, because I want the likes of Suarez and Godin and Muslera and Cavani in particular. I want those four to go out in a high, whether it's a quarter final and they lose a bit of a heartbreak or whatever. I want them to go out reminding people of what they once were. And obviously I want Darwin to do really, really well at this World Cup as well. Let's move on then to the last team in this group. So that would be South Korea. They finished as runners-up in Group A of the Asian third round, behind Iran, ahead of UAE, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. A couple of very well-known players here in Heung-min Son, who is their superstar, Kim Min-jae, the centre-back at Napoli, who was so impressive against us. There's a couple of others. Lee Jang-sung of Mainz is a decent player. Hwang Hee-chan of Wolves is a solid player as well. Hwang Oh-joy of Olympiacos, owned by Nottingham Forest in some sort of money laundering deal. This is another team, like we talked with Japan on the last one. They're really well set up. They're really well organised. They're technically good. They're proficient in how they build up and move the ball. Paulo Bento's been there 4 years now as manager. There's maybe a little lack of physicality outside of the centre-backs, but they'll be tough. They'll be tough to beat for everybody.
Yeah, I actually like Korea to go through, to be honest, out of this group. I think that they have the consistency in their play and their reliability, let's say, in how they perform basically each time. I don't think that they're as good as Japan, man to man and as a team, but I just think that I'm not even sure they're actually better than either of the other two groups the other two nations in this group individually. It's just that I could see Cameroon are obviously right at the beginning of a cycle now with all the players that they've brought in, and that could be quite difficult to get any kind of consistency across even 3 games from, to be honest. They might win one, but then be quite poor in the other 2. Uruguay, similarly, I could see winning any one of the 3 games, but then being beaten in the other 2. Maybe Korea, just by virtue of being a bit more set up well, organised, very clear in their approach, very familiar in probably what the starting 11 is, or at least I'd say 8 of this starting 11, maybe even 9 of them. It's really simple and straightforward to see what they're going to do. And obviously they're going to need, I would say 3-4 of those key players to really perform. But if they do, I could see them probably getting, let's say, the 4 points that they might need to go through. I don't honestly think that they would go through if they were in a slightly stronger group or if there were 2 good sides in the group. But they might just have enough within this squad in terms of the familiarity and the individual ability of 2 or 3 of them that you picked out. A couple of them, Kim Young-won, I would say, is another one as well. He'd probably be centre-back alongside Napoli's Kim. He was at, Guangzhou Evergrande for ages when the CSL was half decent with lots of money and all that sort of stuff. He was one of their most consistent and really, really strong performers there. He nearly came to Europe a couple of times, but he's back in Korea now. Assuming it's like him, for example, and Kim Min-jae centre-backs, you've got 2 really experienced players there. Kim Min-jae is really powerful in the air. Kim Young-won really good on the ground. Midfield, you already know who you're going to be building through. They're a little bit reliant on Hwang up front, Hwang Ui-jo, for goals as the centre forward, and obviously people for Son to play off and all the rest of it. But other than that, maybe if they get Son and him playing really well, and then your centre back partnership are in very good form, I could definitely see them getting at least 1 win and maybe another draw if you just need that to go through.
Yeah, I think this group is really well balanced. I think it's really open. It would be obviously a shock if Portugal didn't go through, But I do think you can make real cases for any of the other three to go through as that secondary team. Now, I would back Uruguay, but like you said, they could easily win one game and lose two others. I mean, Uruguay are they're going to be weird. They could lose to Korea, beat Portugal, and then lose to Ghana and end up going out. That's just how they are. But I'm going to back Uruguay. So I would have Portugal, Uruguay, Korea, and Ghana. And by the sounds of it, you'd have Portugal, Korea, Uruguay, and Ghana.
So. I think it'll be very, very tight for that second spot. I actually think Uruguay will beat Korea in the game between each other. But if Korea have already beaten Cameroon beforehand, then they play Portugal last. If Portugal have already got 6 points and gone through rotations, etc., I think it just could work out okay for Korea to go through as the second side here.
And that's it. That is us done with the 8 groups, 4 podcasts. You can listen to them all on Anfield Index, obviously, as you are now. Karl, do you have anything else you want to touch on before we go?
Unless you want to get into the whole thing of why it's in December again.
No, absolutely not. No, God, just leave it alone. It's just stupid, and we all know it's stupid, but it is what it is. Right, we will leave it there. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you follow Karl on Twitter at KarlMatchett. Read his work on The Independent and This Is Anfield. Follow Guy at Guy Drinkle. Follow me at EPL Index. And we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.